from Zanzi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacy.
And I'm Sena. We're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why people love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
Most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice for how to build the brands of tomorrow.
In our last episode, we spoke about all things digital, and if we're honest, there's one group of people who likely consume more digital media than anybody else.
Of course, you must be talking about Gen Z, Stacey, the generation who have only ever known a connected world, and who you would be hard-pressed to find reading a newspaper or watching live TV.
Right? So we may be tempted to treat Gen Z as one homogeneous group, but Gen Z now represents a quarter of the global population. And there are more people under the age of 27 in South Africa than the entire population of Australia. So if you're still not taking the time to fully understand this generation, you're definitely missing a trick.
Which is why we've decided to dedicate an entire episode to the importance of connecting with Gen Z. As a Gen Z myself, I'm pretty excited about the opportunity to share some advice about how to appeal to our generation.
Oh, Sena, have you even read a newspaper?
No, I will decline to comment. So I'm excited to introduce our two guests today. The first has experience as a youth mentor, content creator, and is a tech startup founder. Last year, he was elected as vice chair of the MMA SA Youth Development Board and is currently in a role dedicated entirely to Gen Z marketing at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. A huge welcome to Samsung Africa's Gen Z marketing lead, Anesu Malisa.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, we love it. So Gen Z.
And to our other guest, who currently heads up the brand growth strategy practice at Kantar, she is a seasoned brand expert who has partnered with some of the world's most iconic brands. And before joining Kantar, she was the global brand director at Unilever in London. Welcome to Future Proof from Zanzi, Yasmin Kathoria.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Hey, Anesu, lovely to see you again.
Good to see you, Yasmin.
Okay, so the energy, I'm sure you can tell, is already off the chain. I don't know if Gen Zs would say that, okay. But before we kick off, could you each tell us a little bit about yourselves? Anesu, let's start with you. Describe your career journey so far.
Yeah. You kind of touched on a little bit. Straight out of high school, found myself as an intern at a church, led to me being sort of a youth mentor, youth pastor in Johannesburg. Then went into sort of switched to more content design, kind of started my journey as an influencer, as one would say, YouTuber. And then a year later, found myself burnt out and wondering, what am I going to do with my life? And then, of course, what do? You get up and you say, okay, let's check out the tech startup space. And I was in Cape Town at the time. So the following 2 years sort of dedicated time to sort of, build an idea that I had. And the focus was Gen Z. So that's when, Gen Z really then became a focus. I learned more about who Gen Zs are. And then fast forward, continued TikToking, and out of the blue, I got a LinkedIn DM from a recruiter saying, hey, there's this Gen Z lab thing going on at Samsung. Would you be keen to apply? And I'm like, this is the role I've been waiting for. Let's party karate.
Love it.
Snap.
And yes, perhaps you can share your proudest career moment.
So I kind of probably stumbled into Gen Z. Well, actually, maybe not, because I live with a Gen Z. I have a 16-year-old son. He's turning 16, so I know the ins and outs. But my career journey has always been gravitating towards human-centered design thinking and human-centered understanding. So I started in marketing. I did a little bit of journalism over time, but I have always felt like a misfit in big corporates until I found my space in the consulting world about 7 years ago and focusing on uncovering human and cultural insight. I love getting to the heart of understanding human beings, what makes them tick. And of course, that's what's led me to uncovering all this insight into Gen Z.
Well, Yaz, I'm really glad that you have taken these expertise and this passion and that I get to be like colleagues with you at Kantar. So, I was telling you off camera that I think you're super cool. But anyway, let's get into it, guys. I'm going to try let's get into it, gang. I'm using a little bit of Gen Z lingo there. See what I'm doing? But Anesu, what characteristics distinguish Gen Z from previous generations?
So I always like to say, like, I feel like a cat. I've lived multiple lives, as I've kind of touched on with regards to my career journey. And one of my multiple lives included sort of, learning the art of screenwriting and character development and building worlds. And so one of the frameworks that helped me, that I sort of created with regards to helping build characters, was who's the character, what do they want, and what are the obstacles that they have to overcome to get what they want. And then from there it was like, okay, cool, what is the psychological need that this particular character is trying to achieve? And so through that, then the little light bulb moment came up. Whereas, like, the funniest thing is, you'd be so surprised that a villain and a superhero, they're both trying to fulfill the same psychological need, but the way that they're going about it is what makes them the villain or the superhero. And I think, it's a nice way to also describe Gen Z, right? Where it's like, before we can look at what makes them different, right? Let's look at what makes all generations the same, right? And it's exactly that. It's their psychological needs. But then what then differentiates them is how they go about fulfilling those particular psychological needs, right? And a good example I always like to say is, you look at socially, right? The world that they live in, very connected, very digital world. And that's why you'd find different generations, there's a lot of friction because they don't understand and they don't get it, because how they went about making connections, building relationships were very different. Even, for example, in corporates, there was this funny example in one of my favorite reality shows, by Beverly Hills. And one of the real estate agents, he's Gen Z. And so his team leader unfollowed him on Instagram. And, like, he was really upset. And the team leader's like, I don't get it. Like, dude, like, I just unfollowed you. And so those types of tensions is the best way to describe, what are some of the characteristics that distinguish Gen Z from previous generations.
Anesu, I think that's absolutely excellent. You got me thinking about, like, the most scandalous thing that you can do to a Gen Z, which is block them on social media. So that definitely makes sense. Yas, I want to switch it up to you. According to our Global Monitor Gen Z study from 2021, it found that Gen Z values are at the frontier of transformation and progress. What are some of the core values and priorities of Gen Z consumers that brands need to understand?
Such an interesting question with such an interesting answer. If you think about Gen Z, they are a generation that was born into disruption. They've never not known a year without disruption. If you think about the launch of social media to the launch of smartphones to world wars, and therefore that makes their value system very different to value systems of earlier generations. Baby boomers were born into a generation that was pretty obedient. And if you look at their values, it was hard work, individualism, family, also consumerism. And then we move into Gen X, and Gen X started to be a little bit more rebellious. They made a bit of a dent in that authoritative system that the boomers, kind of created. So if you look at the value that defined that generation of Gen X, it was freedom and ambition and challenge. And then we got millennials, our favorite, as marketeers and business owners, we haven't stopped talking about millennials until we started talking about Gen Z. And millennials did embrace and challenge us. They embraced a new way of living. They challenged our thinking a lot. They started this value system of interdependence and purpose and diversity. But here comes Gen Z. And they've, because they were born into disruption, have disrupted everything we thought we knew about marketing and understanding people and values. And it's so interesting that you talked about blocking people, because one of the values that define Gen Z is loneliness. And that's why we tend to judge them a lot for their behavior. But they are a generation that is coping with the unprecedented disruption. Therefore, if you look at their values, what's shaping them, their loneliness shapes their behavior. They are searching for this kind of future identity. Solidarity is something that shapes them. I think you can see this everywhere you look around us.
Yeah, yes, that is definitely, like, so insightful and interesting. But also, I think about, Gen Zs usually get a bad rap. In If you're frequent social media, you'll see I'm a 2000, almost like exasperated. So, what have you found that what are some of the stereotypes or traps that marketers fall into when engaging with Gen Z? And what's your
Yeah,
advice to marketers to avoid generalizing and rather create truly meaningful connections with this group?
yeah. Great question. And I get asked this a lot, and I'm sure Anesu gets asked this a lot, like, what do you know, what is happening on social media, or what are the trends? And it's actually goes beyond that. Gen Z marketing is completely filled with truisms and stereotypes. I always make this opening slide when I talk about Gen Z is, all those things that we think we know about them. They're spoiled, they're screen absorbed, they're whiny, they're lazy, they're, privileged. But that's kind of looking at them at a very surface level. And what that also does is marketeers fall into the trap of conflating Gen Z with what's popular and what's trending and what the latest hashtag is. And do I have the new Stanley Cup? And, am I wearing the Crocs? But to not to fall into that trap is to really start with the human at the center. And I'll give you an example. 84% of Gen Z in South Africa today believe that challenging stereotypes in advertising is necessary. What does that tell us? It tells us that we're giving a complete blanket approach to Gen Z. 90% feel that they can make a difference to the world around them through the brand choices that they make. So they're a very purposeful generation. We have not done justice to them in the way we've been advertising to them and marketing to them. So we can't fall into the traps of thinking it's all about the trend or the latest social media hashtag. We really do need to understand what's driving those generational values and how can our brands become a meaningful part of this kind of cultural conversation that they're driving.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's all about those meaningful connections. Anesu, I want to move now towards the marketing strategies that we adopt with this group of people. And I guess I want to understand the types of content and formats that you have found resonate the best with this Gen Z group.
Yeah, I'm going to give some formats. I think number one, entertainment, more specifically comedy. So anything comedic is always a hit because it's a great escape. I can't imagine COVID without comedy. I don't know how I would have survived COVID without all of the comedic memes going around. A whole lot of vitamin C, sanitizer, and comedy. But sort of coming to the formats from a Gen Z perspective, I was actually saying this the other day. We have to rewind. We have to go back in time, right? Sort of speaking to like Gen Z's 8-second attention span. And sort of realizing that when I was, a teenager in high school back in like 2010, 2008, one of the most interesting things is that back then there were less options when it came to video consumption, right? So less options. And so less options equals more patience. You had a whole lot more patience with branded ads, with, whatever was sort of thrown at you. And then now fast forward to now where you have a generation which has an abundance of options, more options. So not just from where they can consume content, but what they could do from a control perspective. So if they don't like what they see, they could hit skip. If they don't like what they're watching on the TV, they could pull up their phone. And so one thing that I've, sort of started looking at for the whole 8-second attention span thing, I've sort of realized, it's yes, attention is sort of part of it, but really at the end of the day, we're looking at a generation that's just less patient with things that don't pique their interest. And so from a content perspective, one of the types of piece of content that works with Gen Z, it's not necessarily attention-grabbing content, but interest-piquing content. Once you have their interest, once you've piqued their interest, attention follows. What is piquing their interest? Comedy. Right? It's a sense of relief. That's why I say if you want to understand Gen Z, look at the memes that they're posting. That's market research right there. Obviously, they're living in a world which it's a hyper stimulating world that they live in. And so other pieces of content that piques their interest is content that gets them to escape the noise, meaning the type of content that is relaxing, that is soothing, that really gives them a sensory experience where they feel like they're escaping from where they are. That's why you'd see for some, they love property tours, luxury mansion tours, because for them, it's a sense of escape from their everyday life. And once again, going back down to the whole psychological need perspective, right? So all of us, we have a sense of wanting to escape. And so for this generation, the digital world is that. And so sort of having that sort of lens that you put on to say, okay, cool, what psychological need are you trying to achieve? Equals that's what's going to pique your interest. So as mentioned, if you're wanting to upskill yourself, if you want to be a better version of yourself, then what type of content will pique your interest? self-motivation, all of that sort of like, what is it, self-help type of content. So I really think, to better answer that question is asking, okay, cool, what psychological need would our target consumer be wanting to fulfill? Then any type of content that aligns with that, chances are it's going to pique their interest. If they just want to escape, okay, comedy and entertainment, that's the type of content that would pique their interest.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what, Anesu, it's actually something that we say at Kantar all the time. It's, can we stop talking about advertising to consumers, and can we create content? Because people want to be entertained in whatever version of that entertainment it look like. And I guess that kind of leads me to my next question, which is around authenticity. So we've got a whole bunch of brands who really want to sell stuff. How are they going to show up authentically to this generation who are so hypercritical of authenticity?
Yeah. Authenticity is one of those elusive, concepts in marketing. All brands are like, oh, how do we do this in a way that's, authentic to Gen Z? And they get tripped up trying to be trendy. But what we do see, we try to codify, like, what does it mean to be authentic? And what we see is iconic brands. There's two things. The first thing is that they are timeless but timely. So they know what they stand for, but because they know what they stand for, they can authentically participate in conversations, like current conversations. If you don't know what you stand for, then you seem to be jumping on every bandwagon. If you know what you stand for, you know which is the right conversation for you to be jumping in, right? A brand globally that does that really well is Ben and Jerry's. They've always stood for peace, and so whenever there's global or societal conversations around peace or peace issues or social justice, it looks very natural for Ben and Jerry's. Nando's is a local great example of that. They've always stood for being spicy and provocative and being the cultural commentator, and therefore when they do come in on those conversations, that feels authentic. The second thing is that brands need to think about being progressive yet original. You've got to do something different, because if there's a current conversation happening with Gen Z, brands are like, okay, let's get in on that conversation. And then they add a hashtag, but it just doesn't give them any unique voice in the conversation, because what they're not doing is bringing a progressive or original point of view on that conversation. What do you think, Anesu?
No, 100%. I agree with exactly what you said. And basically, authenticity comes with consistency. Because as you mentioned, it's easy to join any conversation. But now with this generation, it's all about, okay, cool, I know you said this now, but let's check in again in about 6 months. Are you still saying the same thing? And sort of, coming back to, looking at practically, how can you show up authentically? It's just all about product/brand lifestyle fit, right? That's what Gen Z is looking for. And that's where you find loyalty, because you have a generation that it's so hyper conscious of their personal brand versus previous generation because of social media. So that you naturally are more conscious of, how am I showing up online? What do I believe? What is my opinion on a particular thing, right? So with that, when it now comes to purchasing and partnering up with brands, it's all about, how does your brand align with my personal brand? And I think knowing as a brand what type of lifestyles your consumers live and what matters to those particular lifestyles, and being able to speak to that. Because also, as Yasmin sort of pointed out, it's easy when looking at, a younger audience such as Gen Z and say, we have to be cool. And it's like, relevance is not about being cool, but relevance is all about the consumer believing that you as a brand understand who they are, the world that they're living in, the challenges that they're facing, and you as a brand saying, I get you. I see you, I hear you, I understand your world, and this is how we want to show up in your world. That is what relevance is. You don't have to be talking Gen Z slang for them to feel like, oh, this brand is relevant to me. They should just feel like they get me. They understand my situation and scenario.
Yeah, Anesu, so that makes a huge amount of sense. And I actually had a conversation earlier today at a conference I spoke at, where brands were saying they may hypothetically understand everything you're saying around how we want to connect with Gen Z, but they're nervous to do that. And so they're relying on influencers to do that job for them. if we assume that that is a fairly common tactic employed by brands at the moment, then what do brands need to consider when they're choosing those influencers?
What are you trying to say? What is your story? Because sometimes, people, it's easy to bring influencers on board because of their audience. And so one of the big shifts that, I believe needs to happen is saying, okay, cool, this is who we are. Who are you as an influencer? Is there that alignment already? Right? Because if there is that alignment both ways in a mutual way, not just you saying, oh, you're a perfect fit for us, but for the influencer saying, oh, what you are as a brand is a perfect fit for me, then their community also accepts you. Because what often tends to happen is when that matches, it's like, you can see it in the comments. So it's like, oh, get that bag, flame emoji. And it's like, okay, this is just sort of, we're supporting the influencer because their career is booming, but then they're not connecting with the brand. And I think once again, it's coming back down to you as a brand, getting your story straight. Because from there, it makes it a whole lot easier to know who to pick and who not to pick. And remember, authenticity comes with consistency. Because yes, you can partner up with someone once, but then, that connection doesn't happen that first campaign. But as the community and, the people that follow these influencers see, okay, there's a genuine relationship here. That's when they start opening up their hearts and minds to what you want to say as a brand.
Awesome, thanks, Anesu. And anything from you, Yaz, on the topic of influencers and how to choose good influencers?
Yeah, I think I'm also sick of the word influencer. Of course, influencers are necessary and proven to drive value. But a couple of years ago, I was in a workshop, and the Nike team was saying, our approach is not to call them influencers. Like, let's just start with the human beings. Who are the friends and extended family of Nike? Who are the people that share our values? Who are the people that we can co-create with? Who are the people that can tell our story in their own way and it comes across beautifully and relevantly and authentically? That's how brands should be choosing people to collaborate with. Instead of saying, let's hire an influencer, think about who are the people, who are the creators that you want to work with, that you can bring into your brand family, that can actually you can give the freedom, because that's what creators want to do. They want to create. That's how they build their communities and their audiences. And when people see an influencer or a creator not creating and just reading off a script from a brand script, that's when the disconnection happens.
Yeah.
And if you don't
Lovely.
mind,
Thanks.
just sort of throwing in one, I think a cool way to see it, you can see them as prefects or captains of that community.
Nice.
And sort of seeing them like that already changes how you engage with them. If you're seeing them as a captain of a community, then you like, okay, even the way we engage, the way in which we empower them, it also changes. So I think also, and I completely agree, there has to be that shift to not see them just like as influencers, but actually captains and custodians of a community, and
Lovely.
basically the representation, your representation to that community.
So good. Chef's kiss. Love it.
Completely agree. And I think it's so consistent as well with what I've been observing is that this generation is really intent on building and creating community and having a sense of belonging. Anesu, I want to speak about, the Apple ad. So for context, Apple recently released an ad based on the TikTok hydraulic crushing trend. Of course, they were trying to appeal to Gen Z, using this trend to showcase how analog hobbies like music, painting can be crushed to all fit into their slimmest iPad. But the ad didn't quite land. Not only that, it annoyed older generations. And then Samsung, of course, came out with a brilliant response, showing a musician walking into the very same scene of destruction, picking up a damaged guitar to play, and saying, creativity cannot be crushed. We would love to get your views on why the Apple ad failed to engage Gen Z.
Well, I think firstly, I'd say this is such a sobering reminder to all marketers that as much as, yes, you can have a specific intent as a marketer with regards to the message that you want to tell. And then the audience can say, no, bro, that's not it. And also, I think it was such a huge reminder of how passionately people are about creativity, especially in this age of AI and tech. From a Gen Z perspective, you look at creative self-expression, they believe is a huge part of their lives, whether it's to be an influence, to make money from it, or just as a hobby. Creative, self-expression is such a big part of their lives. Obviously, if you're looking at AI, the introduction of AI, and just sort of a sensitivity around, is this going to be used to replace, humans? Is it going to replace creativity? And there's, genuine anxiety because, once again, there are certain jobs where it does appear to be so. But I think also, once again, it was a huge reminder as the responsibility that, for example, us as a tech brand, we have from an education perspective with regards to, what we believe AI should do and should be, which is to enable creativity. And I think, that's how, beautifully the team, the North America team kind of landed to say, we're not here to crush creativity. We're here to enable it. And I think, that's that kudos to them. Kudos to them for that.
Speaking about this kind of meaningful way that people need to, or brands at least, need to engage with the people who are watching them. Yes, in Kantar BrandZ, which we know to be the biggest brand building database in the world, we know that brands with high meaningful difference are so attractive that people are prepared to pay up to twice as much for those brands. Do you think that's the case for BrandZ? And what are they doing that's specifically different to, or what should brands do that is specifically different to achieve that meaningful difference with this group of people?
Yeah. Um, Meaningful difference. I mean, if you break it down to its simplest form, meaning is, do I meet needs? It's emotional needs, it's social needs, and it's physical needs. So, is your brand meeting needs? Every brand was born to serve a need. So, as a brand owner, a brand leader, a brand champion, a brand custodian, what are the needs that your brand is born to serve? And it sounds simple, but sometimes it takes some working through, right? So that's the starting point, the conversation I have with brand owners who ask that question. Be meaningful. Um, Difference is, how do I show up in my category? I must have a unique point of view. I must be seen as setting the trends. I must have something that sets me apart from my competitors. And if you put those two together, serving needs, and doing something different to competitors, you get meaningful difference. So the recipe is not a difficult recipe, and it is quite foundational to how we build brands, right? And it's not different for Gen Z, and we can only do them by truly understanding them as human beings, truly connecting with their values, really getting to the heart of what matters to them most. By the way, there are millennials were a purposeful generation. Gen Z is purposeful on steroids. Like, we really need to know what drives their hearts and minds today to be meaningful. And then the landscape. Anesu talked about this earlier. If you haven't told me what you need to tell me in 10 seconds, you're already out the water. So that also plays into the difference. You need to tell me something different and do it quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Yaz. And I think you almost touch on the last point I want to kind of bring up with you around creating meaningful difference amongst the Gen Z. The Gen Z, listen to me, I sound like the baby boomer. How can brands address this importance of sustainability and social responsibility in the way that they're marketing to Gen Zs in South Africa specifically?
So we've seen from all the Kantar data that people think sustainability is for Europe. That's a myth that's been long busted. So the data tells us that countries like South Africa, where we have the highest impact of societal issues and the biggest concerns that keep people up are the social issues, they expect brands even more so to do something meaningful and make a change in society. So sustainability is not delinked. It is actually at the heart of how brands can be meaningful to people today. And young people have told us unequivocally that they want us, they want brands, they want marketeers to take societal issues seriously, and they want to see us making a positive social impact.
Okay, so it seems we've come to the end of our interview, but I would just want to say
Oh
no
no!
cap. Okay, this convo has been
Part
lit.
two.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, we always like to ask our guests some more general questions just to get a glimpse of what interests you.
So let's start
Ooh.
with you, Anesu. Other than Samsung, obviously, what brands do you think are doing a really good job at connecting with Gen Z?
I think personally, I've been really fascinated with what Louis Vuitton has been doing. I think specifically from a collaboration perspective, I've just sort of really been fascinated with obviously the introduction of Pharrell as sort of the new creative director from a men's perspective, and sort of how he's sort of tapped the shoulders of the likes of your Tyler the Creator and what he's done with his capsule. Because obviously they're trying to keep the brand attractive to the younger audience and the younger generation. And I think sort of their use of culture and really sort of tapping into sort of music, and from a passion point perspective, how they're tapping into global music culture. Because, typically it's very easy for sort of the luxury brands to tap into, for example, European culture. So for them, they're sort of on the list. And then obviously Nike as well, what they've been doing, like specifically with brands and how they're partnering up with other captains of communities. So for instance, like your Nike and, tapping Travis Scott, and just sort of following what they've been doing there. That's sort of been piquing my interest.
Yes, in looking to the future, what trends do you expect to see in marketing to Gen Z over the next couple of years?
I don't want to get caught in the trap of saying trends. I say brands need to move at the speed of culture. And to do that, you have to keep your finger on the pulse. You have to draw intelligence from the edge of culture at real speed. We just designed a program for Coca-Cola across all their markets in Africa, which is called Get Into Culture, which means get out of your office and participate in culture, have real-time conversations with people, the people that we serve. And I do think we can expect more of the same type of big shifts, big disruptions, which are unpredictable. And so, yeah, my only kind of watch out, or how do we keep our finger on the pulse, is to just be out in culture and be listening every day.
Oh, yes, that's actually like literally exactly the words of Mike Sharman. We spoke to him last week, and that was exactly what he was saying, is we need to move at the speed of culture, and let's not talk about trends, let's talk about culture. So great. Great, whatever the
Synergy.
word is. Thank you. Okay, thanks again to both of you, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. For more information, you can follow Insights by Kantar on LinkedIn or else on X, and we would love to hear from you guys. So please leave us a review and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube so that you never miss an episode. Until next time.